Well, thank you so much, Judy, for being on the podcast today. We're really excited to have you. Kind of like I said in the email, it's super, super casual. I really just kind of want to talk about those kind of core driving point that we were talking about a lot the other day and kind of tying it into our personal lives, why it's important to us, and then what does that look like kind of moving beyond it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, man, where would be the best place to start? So, how about for the audience sake, would you like to give a introduction for yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, my name is Judy Ryan, and I am the CEO of Lifework Systems. We've been in business, we're in our 19th year. And I've actually been doing the work for over 30 years, but full time since 1998 and as a business owner since 2002. And the reason that it matters so much to me is that my mission is to create a world where all people love their lives. And I want people to not only love their life, I want them to love their life.
Mm.
So a lot of times we've been put in situations where we feel like someone else is putting us in that box of who we're supposed to be. And I want people to have hold an intention for their life that what is my path and how do I get the support I need to live that path. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm so interested in, was so attracted to work with you, Rob, because I believe you see people and life that way more than just a formula.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that means so much to me that you see that, Judy, and I see the exact same thing in you. I was just talking to one of our new interns today. Like he is just blown away by how much we're building everything, his entire experience to build into his path. Like we were talking about this the other day,
Yeah.
and he's just continuously floored by it. But it's reflecting on that. It's like, well, it's because the rest of the world doesn't think that way. It's because he's
Mhm.
floored, right? It's
Yeah.
because everyone's approaching it like a series of numbers and how do they make a dollar 10 versus truly investing in what got you here and those relationships and that team to actually go from dollar 10. So let's try make that dollar two, three, $5, right?
Yeah.
But it takes that long-term thinking and the willingness to like put your money where your mouth is. It's like if you actually care about your staff, this is the answer of how to do that and make them grow into the A players you want them to be.
Well, what strikes me about what you said is putting your money where your mouth is. I think a lot of organizations don't put their mouth and their thought into what do we want to cause, not only for our customers, but for our employees and our vendors and our communities. And that's a set of values, really an organizing principles to want to set a purpose or mission, to want to set up a set of core values and have those instruct the way that you operate or all the visions that you create from there forward. So I know, I hope you don't mind if I do this, but I just want to kind of pull what we're talking about right now into the conversation of divine and human, because
Yes.
that's, I think, what we wanted to work
Hmm.
on, right? Or
Definitely.
talk about, which I don't typically do. So I love it that you've invited me to do that,
Yeah.
because I
Well,
think it's timely right now.
Well, and I think it builds into the real deal conversation of how we started this of like, okay, we're going to talk about investing in those relationships. What does that look like? Well, let's look down to just what the human experience is and what does each human bring to the table, right?
Yes. Yeah. And, even to define what is the human experience at its best is even a kind of a controversial or
Hmm.
multifaceted way of looking at things. I remember the reason that I like the model we use, which is based on the psychology of Alfred Adler, which is actually called individual psychology, is to take a deep look at what is it that every human being needs to kind of expand into their fullest potential. And I would even say, in the context of this conversation, how do we get them to expand into the remembrance of their divinity? Because when we are tapped into that we belong and that we have significance, there's, I believe, a way we also tap into the fact that we're greater than the experience we
Yeah.
have as a human only. It's in a
Hmm.
larger feeling of a context. And so what I love about the work that I do is it's really focused on what are the conditions and conversations that need to be in place for people to tap into that healthy belonging, significance, and divinity. And how do you, and this is where the real conversation feels like it's been a growing experience for myself, is that we can be firm and disciplined and hold high expectations about ourselves and others without being vengeful or without believing in punishing. And I think that what has happened a lot of the time is because so many people have been influenced to grow or civilized or put through a conditioning process, domesticated. Yeah. Because so many of us have been domesticated in kind of harsh and shaming ways. We translate that to anytime somebody gets upset as if they're harsh or shaming or trying to cause pain. And so what happens is, I think on a spiritual construct, a lot of people think that the more spiritual you are, the less emotional, the less that you feel the negative emotions. And in reality, I don't believe that's true. I think it's what you do with those feelings and what your intent is in using your power that determines whether you're living from a spiritual perspective or you aren't.
Well, I really want to address this before we go on, because this is so critical. I completely agree, and I see that a lot in the ecosystem of people who think they're living a heavenly lifestyle, right? They believe that that's what they're approaching. They're acting in that act of divinity. But as we see time and time again, divinity within the human experience is entirely based off rising above and doing the hard thing, no matter what. And the activity of creating a sterile spiritual experience, it does not do what the entire point of the spiritual experience is supposed to do, which is to lower the ego and create those relationships between us and our entire planet, right?
So I want to comment on one of the phrases you just used, rising above. When I think of truly fulfilled, successful people, sometimes they're the ones that don't look like they're rising above. And the example that came to my mind is Mother Teresa. She didn't look like she was living the good life in some people's book, right?
Yeah.
She went all the way down to the level of the dying, the ill, the poor, the crippled. And I'm not saying we're all called to do that, but I think real spirituality is finding our way of connecting and
I completely agree.
Contributing that doesn't have a feeling of I'm rising above, because for a lot of people spiritually, rising above kind of feels like I cannot be immersed in
it's because the term has been beat to death within how casually using it colloquially. And so it's like I completely agree that we need a redefinition of what that looks like. Because I would say rising above, rising to our more divine nature is actually to be more integrated into humanity and to serve it.
Yes.
Right. It is Mother Teresa getting into the trenches is rising above. But because the easy thing to do is to sterilize our entire experience and shift away from like those real moments, that then creates this fictional spirituality where it's like, oh, I don't need to get my hands dirty because I'm spiritual. And that's completely the opposite. It's because you are spiritual that there is no dirt on your hands. It is you get in there, and because you are acting for the good, the perspective of what's dirty and what's not completely disappears. It's the entire point is the service.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about what you just said is that it makes me think of any really negative addiction is a way of avoiding our own pain. And some people do it through drugs and alcohol and food, and other people do it through spiritualizing and what they call spiritual bypassing. And I know I myself struggle with that. I didn't think a lot about our podcast, but the little bit that I did this morning, I was thinking about, I love human systems. So I know my own Enneagram, if you've ever heard of that model. And so I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, which means that I am a reformer. I see things that could be at their best, and I'm like driven to help them be at that best. And yet so many people that were given support to be at their best, like I said before, it was done to them in a very
Yeah.
frightening. And so I think what happens is when people who are spiritual are faced with a high level of conflict or shadow, or like right now, our politics and
Yeah.
everything is so dark, light, combined, that I think what it does is it triggers people's emotional trauma from when they weren't
I completely agree.
developed properly. Yeah.
The entire thing, human experience. I just had an amazing conversation about this the other day, is that we are blending the ability, this divine nature to rise above within a redefinement, to get into and do all that we can do. But our society is still unlearning the things that kept us alive, all these years through, our fear-based mindset
Yes.
kept us from getting murdered by saber-toothed tigers. And because we want to look at duality as different versus all as one, we're not appreciating that the fact that this fear-based mindset is the reason we're here today. But just,
Yeah.
but
And
go
even
ahead.
when you talk about fear-based mindset, the reason I even brought up the Enneagram is it's based in our fear and woundedness. Like it's from the Enneagram is defined by
Reactionary.
our trauma.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so my particular fear has always been that I will be evil, corrupt, and that usually means when I'm angry, right? So I've had to work very hard to recognize that when I'm angry, it does not mean that I'm evil. And a lot of people are going through that. Like when you look at the political arena, this is a broad generalization,
Yeah.
but there's no accident that Democrats are considered bleeding heart liberals. Like that's the phrase that's often portrayed. And one of the things that I'm recognizing right now in our current political climate for myself is that I can feel passionate emotions, and some of those emotions can be anger and even rage, and it does not mean that I'm seeking vengeance. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of spiritual people, they want to be on the side of doing something effective in the face of some of the things that are happening, but they're afraid that if they get passionate, even angry, that they're going to be interpreted to be unspiritual and some kind of rageaholic. And I don't think those two things really necessarily go hand in hand.
No, no, they don't, because we have to separate that from our understanding, because the same thing happens on the opposite side. The conservatives are often thought to be more spiritual and more religious from the traditional way of interpreting those words, right? And so
Right.
that's where, it's, we're both looking at each other and thinking the other is the villain, versus understanding we are both appreciating two sides of the same coin, and together we'll be able to actually create that
I
value.
love that point, and I would say that actors in either camp, or all camps, have an idea. See, for our company, and this has been something I've really had to reconcile, we actively work against for dismantling control models. We work for replacing punishment with something other than punishment or bribery or enabling and all those things. And yet it can look on the surface to be the same thing. So the example that I would give is, let's say you have a person that's drunk driving, and a police officer pulls them over and decides to, arrest them and put them into a place that is going to ensure public safety, which is jail, right? So he takes that person to the car, makes sure carefully that that person is safely put into the cop car. There's no anger that is intending to hurt this person. Now, his adrenaline might be flowing and he might be angry, but he's not choosing to use it against the person.
Exactly.
And then you have people that they've been encouraged. I can even think our president saying, don't be so nice to them when you put them in that cop car. Don't worry about them hitting their heads. And this is not about just to focus on that particular person, but it's an intent. There's an intent that a lot of people on the conservative religious and the spiritual religious think that when you are firm and you can even have your adrenaline going, that it automatically means you're being vindictive or vengeful. It could be either.
Yeah, well, it's entirely based on how are we viewing the scenario and how are we relating ourselves and what's happening around us to our personal identity. And so that's where it's just like I have so much empathy for it because I understand where both sides are trying to come from. And when they say don't be too nice, it's like, it breaks my heart because I know that the next era for humanity is going to be one of empathy, kindness, and unity, right? And
Right,
so
and it's also going to be one in which firmness and high expectation are present with love, kindness, and support. And that's what people feel
yeah,
like it's hard to, I even struggle with that. I even think, oh my gosh, if I'm being passionate about something going on with politics right now, and I'm expressing a perspective of protecting the public or the Constitution or whatever, I even worry sometimes, am I crossing over into vengeance? But all I have to do is look to realize I'm not, unless I am. Then of course
yeah,
I pull myself out of that.
it's it's the I think what it is that right now, because we are in a reactionary point in our society, is that fear-based structure internally and causing us to see the other side is preventing us from getting intimate with the why and the how and the what, like
Totally.
all of it
Yeah.
with the other side. And so it's so much, especially for people like me, where I'm a philosopher. I think the entire move around politics is really dangerous because it focuses on control schemes like you're talking about, instead of what are the core principles and core needs that we need to address, and let's do it in the most practical, efficient manner that balances the equation and the math with the human value of this person's heart and the
I,
emotions going through.
I would agree with that across the board, whether you're talking about religion, politics,
Yeah.
civic, policy. It's right now, it's still always going to lean into the side of domination, control, win, lose, and things like no pain, no gain.
Can
That
I
sort of
tell you
believing.
why I think that exists, Judy?
Mhm.
I really think this exists is because when we're reactionary, we can't think long term.
No, I would agree. I think
I
that's
think
why
that,
whenever we do anything, we need to recognize, am I in self-awareness and self-management, or am I in complete, like, out of control?
yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that when we are focusing on these friction points and not the whole picture, right? And not getting intimate with what the why and the reasoning on the other person's side and what's valuable to them, I think it's I'm losing my train of thought. What Oh, I'm so sorry, Judy.
that's all right. That's okay.
Where was I just going with this?
Well, I think what you were really saying is that the reason politics is so contentious, and even discussions on religion have always been
Yes, that's right.
contentious, is because we approach it from an aggressive, I would call it a patriarchal spirituality, where it's too much emphasis on force and domination, not enough on collaboration and
Well,
love.
that's where I would redefine that. That's what a contradicting perspective would be of a negative experience with a more patriarchal, right, spirituality. Because as someone who's studied more of these patriarchal, because it's really hard to even find religions that don't fall into that
Mhm.
category, because you can even say Hinduism and Buddhism do as well.
Right, right.
um, and so, but from what I've seen is that masculinity operating at its best is not aggressive, it's
No.
steadfast.
And it is always balanced with the feminine, whether it's in a male
Exactly.
body or a female body.
That's
I have an example that I think could sort of
illuminate. Yeah.
describe what you're talking about. When I'm on social media, I try to focus on what would I do right now that lives into my purpose. And so yesterday somebody wrote something, and this is going to, declare my own position, but they wrote something like, I don't think there's anything wrong that I love President Trump and he did X, Y, and Z, and she named his good things, and
Mhm.
everybody was attacking her. And
Yeah.
I wrote to her and I said, first of all, it's never wrong that you're loving anyone. And I applaud you for defending that. And I know that if you and I were to talk about where we're coming from on this person, we both have very different perspectives. And I just want to remind both of us that we are more important as human beings than whatever belief systems we operate from.
And I would even say, Judy, that if you had that talk and talked about what was important from both of your sets of needs and focuses, you would actually find a lot more in common, and that the manifestation of those beliefs is just different.
I would agree. And I don't even think I can find a way to build a bridge with somebody until I acknowledge you are more important than anybody's belief systems, and so am I, you know. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to practice that, so that I'm saying I'm disturbed by the perceptions I'm having, but I also know you must be too.
Yeah.
And more than anything, I just want to say that you deserve to be loved yourself, regardless of your belief system, and so do I. So let's hope that together we can find some truths that we can agree on someday. And it wasn't really that I was going to develop that with her, because I don't even know the person that was on there, but I want to keep sending that signal that we can bring a balanced male-female response to all of it without denying our perspective, without denying the fears or concerns.
Well, and that's to look at, we have masculine and feminine energy in all of us. Like, this is not a one-sided game. It is rather the beauty of the universe is that it all balances out into create a thing that is good, right? And because we're not looking at that in the bigger picture, we want to nitpick the difference of energy in the moment without looking that because these things are here in front of us, it is good. And where we are moving is good.
And what we are feeling is good,
Yeah.
especially when we are guiding it with intent. And sometimes we think we are, and we find out we're not, because
Exactly.
but a lot of times I think when you've really committed to that, and that's what I'm coming to, and that's why I brought that back to my own fears of anger being always wrong. And I'm really learning right now, being angry is not always unloving or even when I'm like, for example, when my kids would run out into the street, believe me, I wasn't saying stop in a very nice, easygoing voice, right?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
that child probably thought I was going to kill him for a second, you know? But that's what mother bear love looks like, right? It's protective, it's immediate, it's fierce, it's ferocious in a way. And it doesn't, if it's not designed to hurt other people, it is felt in its essence. And so I'm learning how, with all of this turmoil and how it triggers things in myself, I'm learning it's still okay to express from these darker feelings, as long as you are clear about your intent and what you're causing.
Intent, because intent is what drives the rest of the energy. And that's how human beings are actually communicate. Because if 90% of our communication is nonverbal, that means it's entirely about everything else, right? And so whether that energy has consolidated into physical body language and my tone or what have you, right? It's all just different ways of looking at one energy communication line. And because if you are leading with intention versus reaction, all of that communication will be received upon, right, an initial, even if it's explosive, and follow up relational steps, because that is how you show you care. And taking this into the business world, it's when you get angry, right, outside of intention, right, it's less about what they did and they're internalizing it as you are mad at their identity, right? And
right, that you're in reaction to something that you're being triggered by, you know. But I think the thing that I'm coming into is that even when I recognize I'm being triggered, it does not mean that I can't funnel it into being loving, even though it doesn't look sugar and spice all the time. And that's what I'm really recognizing, that there is love that can be very direct, very decisive, very firm. I mean, even when I think of somebody like Martin Luther King, you know, he didn't come across soft. He came across very firm.
From a Buckingham jail, and it's entirely based off of, if there is a law that is unjust, it's our responsibility to civilly, you know, protest it. It's
right. Well, I was watching a really interesting documentary the other day called "You're Not My Negro," and it was Baldwin, who studied Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and various, people that were in the civil rights. And he made a statement that at some point Malcolm X kind of came into alignment with Martin Luther King, because I think what he felt was not occurring was the passion, was the conviction, was the anger. And I think, I'm not certain because I don't know for sure what that person meant, but I believe that anybody that is in the path of choosing to improve the world and isn't completely embittered by trauma and discouragement will eventually bring that passion to the table in whatever way they do it. And I think that showed that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were not all that different from one another.
No, it was just
In the beginning,
manifesting change differently.
yeah, I mean, in the beginning, Malcolm X was about vengeance and we got to get ours, but he switched that over time to, I can be passionate and angry and
I think it's growth, right? And so it's just then looking at intensity does not equal negativity, right? And it's retraining ourselves that in moments of intensity to still be present.
And that intensity can be within the most spiritual people we've ever met. It can be. It doesn't mean that everyone expresses that way, but they're.
Well, as a Christ follower, you have me, like, I completely believe in righteous anger, but we have to completely redefine what healthy anger relationships look like.
Yes.
Because we have so much, like you said before, negative association wrapped up in it that it completely prevents it from being a healthy tool in any given situation.
Well, and also I think that sometimes, like for me, I teach redirecting negative behavior, and I believe in creating this world where people love their lives and all the conditions for that, right? But I remember one time I was teaching a group of people about redirecting negative behavior, and somebody said, "You're in one of the mistaken goals yourself." And as soon as she said it, I realized she was right.
Oh, yeah.
And I had the maturity to go, oh, I must be more discouraged today than I realized. So what I did was I said, I think you're absolutely right. So how would you redirect me right now? Like, instead of wasting that moment going into shame and embarrassment, I owned it. And I remember one time another person working in my company came up to me and she said, are you upset with me? Are you worried that I'm not doing a good job? And, I could tell she was very thrown off. And I stopped and I said, okay, if you're feeling judged and you're feeling less, I must be in the goal of significance, which is a mistaken pattern of misbehavior that typically when we're in it, we're not conscious that we're in it. And I said, and I'm saying all this in front of her, I wonder where I don't feel okay about myself, because I understand that dynamic enough to self-examine it. And I said, you know what? I went to a meeting this morning and I saw all these people that were doing all these things that I'm not doing. And then I looked and saw how much money I owe you. And I was like, holy shit, can I even do this? I shouldn't have probably cussed, but, will I be up to paying all of this work for her? Yeah. And so that's where I went into the goal of significance. I'm saying this to her. And she literally started crying and said, thank you for saying that. Because it's not that I'm perfect in my, right. We can be spiritual and make mistakes.
People aren't used to it. They're not used to it. And because of the nature of transmutation, of you doing that work in that moment, that energy is then every present area that you are right then, and it can be felt. And
totally.
The amazing part, this is why Christ never went out to try to convert people. It's entirely about being, right? And when you be in the most intentful way, it changes the world around you.
He also had such a compassion and acceptance of people that didn't have self-awareness, weren't necessarily self-managing or managing relationships, whether they were tax collectors and prostitutes or whether they were his own disciples that got freaked out.
And this brings up a fantastic conversation of like, then why is the rest of the world working this way if the people in which we put on pedestals, right, acted right? And it's entirely based off of like, we can intellectually understand something, but building it within ourselves is a completely different process. And that's why we have to be so intentional about this process.
Yeah, so we have to be circumspect in many ways. And I think that's what kind of brought this whole conversation up when I talked about Jeff Brown, who's a modern day philosopher / spiritual person. He is one of the best for integrating the traumatic experiences that have happened to us so that we honor them, but don't operate only from that or mostly from that, but that we don't ignore and take opportunities to heal that. I mean, I know you and I are talking about Christianity, but first came
Yeah.
the acceptance and the compassion, and then people's hearts were changed. It wasn't the other way around. Oh, you can come and have dinner with me once you're perfect enough, right?
And that's, but here's the thing, that is what people are doing in politics. That's what people are doing in religion. That's what people are doing in business right now.
Yes.
And that's the fun part of this, is that we have the order reversed because we're too focused on the results in such a short time mindset that everything is like, oh my gosh, because my identity is wrapped up in having that now as I want it, we can't even appreciate remotely what these relationships could look like when we let them do their best.
And for me, the relationship that I'm most aware of right now is the one I have with my own anger, passion, because I'm bringing into balance the male female. There's the part of me that's always been so committed to collaboration and putting down win lose. But I also want to own the part of myself that is passionately, at times, angry and upset and firm and clear, which is the more decisive, results oriented masculine energy. And I still struggle with that because we have these pictures of what spirituality is supposed to look like. I almost wish there were more examples of Jesus than just him throwing things around in the temple, because I'm sure that he had a full range of emotions.
And there are, right? It's just, you have to be in the ecosystem enough to, right, get into it. And it's hard because the community doesn't want to have the reason why, this is a better way to say it. The reason why the community doesn't want to talk about those things and put them on the main conversation points is because they are insecure about its mirrorness and seeing the change they need to do in order to view even what they're talking about the right way, let alone, right? So that's why, because it's not talked about, you can see there's actually this gaping insecurity around this topic.
Right. Well, and I think there is, like, when I work with companies, they will often bring in a great idea and layer it on top of win-lose control systems. And then they think, well, that was a stupid tool that I brought in because clearly it didn't work. Well, what they don't realize is we're so used to functioning out of a fear-based, threatening, domination kind of mindset that we can't hardly imagine bringing in a tool and not putting it on that foundation.
Well,
You know,
because right, it's our internal operating system, right? Until you go back and change the code yourself, everything you do is going to touch that.
yeah, and I think for me, I've done so much changing the code, but all of a sudden I'm being called to change it bigger, badder, deeper.
But I think this is the nature of an experience with the divine, because the divine is infinite and we are finite. And so it's like the entire process, this is what the Greeks talked about, eudaimonia, right? It's this constant pursuit of human flourishing. The job is never done, and that's why it's a beautiful journey.
I think that is so brilliant that you just said that, because there is a part of me, and I know it's part of a lot of people, that want to get to this hallelujah point where we don't have to go through any more growing pains. Yeah.
And this is why I love what Buddha talks about so much, that it's entirely about reverse engineering being. And when we speak, when we act, what are those driving foundational pieces, right? And how do we then pull ourselves out of that and really attune our focuses in the being divine based on that, being made in that image, and having the ability to change the people in front of us by just showing love,
Yeah,
and
and I think it is a
we can't
stage that
focus on the equation.
I agree. I think there's a tendency in our humanity to want to get to a solution too fast. One of the things that I love in the work we do is by M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
And he said the way to get to authentic community, there's a space to pass through where you've stopped being fake, which is pseudo community, and you've stopped doing chaos, which is I'm right, you're wrong, which we see a ton of. And you go to a state called empty, where I am choosing to be receptive, disclosing, but not telling you what I'm going through to change you or fix you, and recognizing how beautifully different, separate, and gifted we both are, and really having respect that the other person is as worthy as they are.
Yeah.
And there's no solutions happening in that space.
Exactly.
There's
Exactly.
the connection of sincere, empowering love happening in that space, even if it looks emotionally childish or passionately reactive, or it can look like so many things. But if there's no judgment, no desire to fix anything, people will grow past that momentary experience into becoming more solidified, more whole. And then the decisions that are made are so incredibly fast after that.
Yep. 'Cause I think it's transcendence. I think it's truly moving beyond the ego, right? And once you have that moment of reducing how you identify with the world to a point of just like you are comfortable in you, and the externals, it doesn't change that internal value system. I think it completely changes how we can approach and make those relationships.
Yeah, it's so funny because I have a little bit different perspective about the word ego. I think ego, when it's used to dominate and control, or for
Mhm.
selfish purposes, is a really negative. That's what I think most people mean when they
Yeah.
say ego. But it takes a very strong ego to go into empty with someone. I mean, I
I
knew that when I went into
disagree.
that conversation.
I think it takes a very small ego to go into ego with someone, to empty with.
Well, and it's just what is it? Semantics.
What
I remember reading a book that the man who wrote it said Jesus had to have a very big, healthy ego to say, "I'll go up on the cross and show you that life never really ends."
Yeah, I
Like,
wouldn't call it, from my understanding from spirituality, ego, that I would say that's the higher self, right? That's the observing self. And that within the relationship is then creating the pathway for ego to then exist within a healthy structure. But as soon as I hear big ego, right, I look at the size of ego corresponds to identity outside self. And so that's where I would say it's like,
well,
just
if I were to use that definition, I would completely agree with that.
yeah,
So, regardless of what we call it, I think there is a
I
point at
completely agree.
which we can be with
Yeah.
each other and with ourselves with no agenda. Because
Mhm.
that's really what empty is. Let go of the agenda, the prejudices, the fears, the ideas that if I crumble into a mess right now, that means I'm a basket case instead of I'm just a
It's
human
want,
being.
desire. It's all the things that we come up to the table and feel like we are not good enough because we
Yeah.
have not reached yet.
Yes. And I think once we are with ourselves and one another that way, we can be so much better for the world, for the solutions that will come after.
Yeah.
But if
Oh my
we can't
God.
skip that step,
But now you've created a nurturing relationship
mhm.
where that flourishing can happen now, right? Because we're no longer attacking each other with toxic, right, interactions. It's now we just want the best for each other.
And Rob, that's how I feel about you. And I know this is going to sound all mushy and everything, but this whole period of politics right now has really caused me to have this huge gamut of emotional experiences and awarenesses, and times where I feel like I'm kind of stuck in this place where I don't even want to try to fix, convert, or heal myself, because I know that there's some purpose for it. But I also know it's not everybody that can be with that.
Yeah.
And I feel like you always ask me, or frequently ask me, how you doing with everything? And for whatever reason, I just tell you, I don't pretend. So that says a lot about you creating safety and me creating safety.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's something I wish everyone would learn to do, because it is one of the biggest answers, I think, to
Mhm.
getting to a point of real rebuilding of our
Oh my
world.
gosh. It's so many people ask how you doing as like a check the box when it's an opportunity for two souls to talk to each other. And it's we miss out on that.
And sometimes when you do start talking to each other, there's the fear that I'm going to be attacked, but when it doesn't occur,
Oh.
it's amazing. I remember there was a guy that was on one of our client sites, because our client sites really create a ton of safety and trust pretty
Mhm.
quickly. But despite that, when I would sit in on his mentoring sessions, a couple of times he would literally get tears in his eyes and he would say, I'm still struggling trusting this, because I would, every time in my other job, if I were this vulnerable, it would be used against me like crazy. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, and I just said, take whatever time you have to
Yeah.
relax into it, because it's understandable if you wouldn't want to immediately.
Oh my gosh. That's you're moving me. That's that's the whole game. You know, the just the opportunity to catch a glimpse of that, of him wrestling with that inner, right? But it's
Yeah,
just, that's to be aware of that is to see someone else path to transcendence, to enlightenment, to
yeah,
growth and healthy relationships with self and everyone around them. And it's just part of that process is pulling out that muck we have inside of ourselves and putting it on the table, and it, not judging it and being like, I understand why this is here, but it doesn't
mhm,
serve me anymore, and that's why
yeah.
I need
I
to.
mean, I think we teach a lot of that in our work, which I consider to be spiritual,
I
and
think,
to
yeah,
match with Buddhism and Christianity, a lot
yeah,
of faith. But I think what I'm learning is sometimes that muck is a little bigger, because of like a whole series. Like right now, our world feels like it's being put through something where anything that was traumatizing is being called to the surface, like all at the same time.
well, I really just think that's the result of attention, right? And when you have more attention, you have more awareness. And when you have more awareness, right, before you've gone through so much cleansing and foundational building, increased awareness leads to a, let's just say, as Christ says, brother against brother, son against father, mother against son. Like the whole thing is because we're having to approach that in ourselves and that in our relationships and that in
Yeah.
our world.
I think that in a way, all of these circumstances occurring at the same time are purposeful for us to
Yeah.
make new choices. I know I'm feeling that personally, even in the
Mhm.
work I'm doing. And sometimes I can feel a little ungrounded, like, oh my God, am I even capable of helping anyone else in certain moments? But then to realize we're more resilient than we know. And each experience I have, hopefully, is going to give me more patience, more understanding, more compassion, and more willingness to go to that empty place as long as it takes.
Yeah.
And then to find out most of the time it doesn't take that long. If we're in the presence of people who do not try to fix, convert, heal, or change us, I don't think we stay stuck in that very long.
No.
So I know when we first started talking, my reaction has been to some of the people in my life that are very quote unquote spiritual, but it feels like they're very dissociated. And I think I just need to know that that's okay that that's happening, but it may not be the most helpful to me at this point.
Well, it just changes how we approach that person because they're in a
Mhm.
different place, right? And I
Right.
think that result is a consequence of the insecurity leading to the avoidance of integration with everyone else,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah. I always think of it as coping mechanisms. Sometimes people are more triggered than they're aware of, and they're doing coping mechanisms and maybe not even knowing they are. I know I've been in that.
yeah, oh my God, but that's why the reflective process is so amazing, is because we then take the moment to find ourselves, oh crap, I realize I missed my exit 5 miles ago, you know? But that's okay because it's the entire point of like you finally looked in the rear view mirror and you saw, oh, there's police sirens behind me. I guess I should pull over. They didn't have to get the helicopters out. I'm okay, right?
Yeah. And to learn to enjoy the ride even when you do that stuff.
Yeah.
That's the trick.
That takes some inner peace, right? But it's what it takes. It's because it's not going to hurt us. It's only going to better us on our path.
Yes, and expand our bandwidth of being with other people. I think that is really a big part of it. At times when I'm in my own stuff, I think, okay, I hope there's some good reason this is happening, but I actually know that nothing
Yeah.
happens without it being
Faith. Yeah.
support, you
Yeah.
know. So, what else? Anything else we could
I
speak
mean, Judy, I think this has been so phenomenal. I think because also see that Dom's waiting in the room behind us, so we should probably engage with him.
of?
But
Okay.
this has just been so wonderful to actually connect with each other and show it's like this is no matter if you're business to consumer or business to business, it's always going to be person to person. And
Yes.
because that's the case, these conversations need to be our second nature, our first it's just, we need
Yes.
to be able to engage with each other at this level, to then receive the next series of gifts. But this
Yes.
itself, to have the friction to push us into having these relationships, this is a gift. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll just keep on doing that and helping each
Wonderful.
other.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. And this will be my mark to cut the video, and then we'll jump into Don here. So
Okay.
wonderful.
Do you
Take
want to,
care.
I guess you have to pull them in here, huh?
Yeah. So cut.